only a couple of weeks away from 2024 NFL free agency, and I thought it'd be a great idea to go through 25 of the biggest name free agents and determine where we think they might land in the 2024 offseason. But before we get into the video, I want to take a quick second to ask you to please subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications. It really helps us out. If you're a fan of the NFL, you'll love this channel. We release multiple NFL-related videos every Tuesday and Friday, so please come along, check us out. That's it. I'm done. Back to the video. And our number one free agent on the board, we have Chris Jones. A couple of notes for the screen. As you can see, we have the age of the player. This is not their age today. This is the age at the start of the 2024 season. And the contract expectations, I have pulled this directly from Pro Football Focus. I am not smart enough to be able to determine exactly what contracts these players likely will get. Either way, though, Chris Jones, Super Bowl champion in back-to-back years, 3 Super Bowl rings already. The Chiefs absolutely want to keep this guy. He wants to stay in Kansas City, but the question is, will he? Will someone else come with a big enough contract? The most talked about team that might go after Chris Jones is the Houston Texans, but I think they will make a push for him. The Kansas City Chiefs, though, he'll give them a discount. I expect him to stay in Kansas City for the future. At number 2, we have Kirk Cousins, far and away the best QB on the open market. In spite his age being 36 coming into next season, this guy has been elite basically every year he's been in the NFL. He is a top tier quarterback. He might not quite be top 10, but he's absolutely top half and can win a Super Bowl with the right team around him. He's expected to get a really good contract, 2 years, $70 million, $50 million guaranteed. Not quite a fully guaranteed like he got when he went to Minnesota in the first place, but I don't expect him to stay in Minnesota. I expect Minnesota to start a rebuild here, and the team that to me makes the most sense is the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons are going to be looking for a QB to pair with all their top-picked assets and skill positions. That's Bijan Robinson with a first-round pick, Kyle Pitts with a first-round pick, Drake London with a first-round pick. These are guys that the Falcons want to know how they're able to perform with a top-tier QB. You know who Kirk Cousins is. Now time to find out how good those guys are. And in an NFC South, they could be hoping to compete in that division with a Kirk Cousins signing. Moving on to number 3, we have Josh Allen of Jacksonville Jaguars, not Buffalo Bills fame. This is a guy who had an absolutely stellar 2024 season. And as you can see here, Pro Football Focus expects him to be franchise tagged. And honestly, so do I. The Jaguars are not letting this guy go. I'm just going to let the cat out of the bag right now. He's not leaving Jacksonville. The question is, does he sign a long-term contract? I did previously think he would sign a long-term contract, but I've been sold on the opposite way. I think he might play on the franchise tag this year because he was so good in 2023. The Jaguars' argument would be, why would we give you the contract based on your 2023? If you have just as good at 2024, fine, we'll pay you. You've done it for 2 years. If you don't have as good at 2024, we can maybe get a little bit more of a discount on a long-term contract and just give you this 1 year on the franchise tag, which is probably less of a value than you'd be getting on the open market, which would probably pay him at least $30 million a year based on his 2023 production. So, sucks for Josh Allen. I'm sorry, my man, but trust me, you will get paid eventually. And at the end of the day, $24 million is not a bad contract to get either way. Moving on to number 4, we have T. Higgins, and this one's kind of already known. The Bengals have already announced they're going to be tagging T. Higgins. Will they sign him to a long-term contract? I don't think so. I think he plays for the Bengals on the tag. Yes, they could still trade him. Yes, they could sign him long-term. But with Jamar Chase needing a contract soon, Joe Burrow already getting paid, this is not a guy I expect the Bengals to be able to keep long-term. They're just in win-now mode. They don't want to lose T. Higgins right away, and so they're going to take him on a rental, basically. Moving on to our number 5 free agent, we have Brian Burns. And don't worry, we're going to get all these franchise tag guys out of the way early, as this is another one. But I don't expect him to play on the franchise tag. I think the Panthers are going to sign him and look to trade him. At the end of the day, the Panthers are not competing anytime soon. They don't have a first-round pick. They don't know how good Bryce Young is. They don't really have weapons around him. And they don't have a whole lot of cap space either. Yeah, they could bring in Brian Burns, but they wouldn't be able to do much else. So I expect them to try to trade him, take advantage of one of their few guys with legitimate value. And who do I think will go after him? I think it's going to be the Houston Texans. This is a team I expect to make a pretty big push for Chris Jones, but if they can't get to Chris Jones, they might look to trade some assets because they already have a massive young core to acquire Brian Burns in a trade. The only issue here is, will the Panthers accept a trade that doesn't include a first-round pick? in 2024. And in fact, they still could give a first-round pick because they have the Browns' first-round pick, just not their own with the Will Anderson trade last year. And on to number 6, we have Justin Madubuike. This is a guy that Pro Football Focus does not expect to have a franchise tag, though a lot of people do think he is a likely tag candidate for the Ravens. I don't think they are going to tag him, though. They did tag Lamar last year, but this is a team that is in a lot of cap strain, especially with paying Lamar Jackson. They have a ton of talented guys that they're going to want to pay moving forward and into the future and are already paying, so they might have to let Madubuike hit free agency. They'll try to get him to sign, but I think he's going to go with the biggest contract, and the team I expect to pay the most is the Arizona Cardinals. This just makes sense to me. Jonathan Gannon is the head coach of the Cardinals, a defensive-minded coach who had 2 massive defensive tackles with the Eagles in Fletcher Cox and Jordan Davis. Madubuike just seems to fit seamlessly into that team, looking to rebuild that defense and offense around Kyler Murray. So Justin Madubuike to the Cardinals might sound weird, but I like it. On to number 7, we have Christian Wilkins, and this guy's a guy that Pro Football Focus expects to be franchise tagged, and I personally agree. The Dolphins have put way too many assets into their present, acquiring guys like Jalen Ramsey, Bradley Chubb, and Tyreek Hill to just let a guy like Christian Wilkins walk. The question is, will he get a long-term contract or will he not? I think he's going to play on the franchise tag at the end of the day for the Dolphins because they do have to sign guys like Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Waddle very soon, and that's going to cost a pretty penny, and I think they will have to eventually let Christian Wilkins walk, but not quite yet. I do feel for the Dolphins, though, because I don't think this team is built to win, but they don't really have many moves to make to improve. Just maintain. Moving on to number 8, we have Antoine Winfield Jr., another franchise tag guy, but another guy I don't expect to play on the franchise tag. I think the Buccaneers want to keep Winfield Jr., and again, spoiler alert, I expect them to keep this guy. They took a lot of their cap deferral from the Tom Brady years just this past year, especially only paying like Baker Mayfield nothing to pay quarterbacks, so they have the cap room to sign a guy like Antoine Winfield. With the cap going up, they will easily be able to get this done, and I expect them to want to sign a guy like this long term. The franchise tag will just be used to extend the contract negotiation timeline. At number 9, we have Jaylen Johnson, another expected franchise tag guy, and don't worry, we only have a couple of these left, but another guy that I expect to stay with this team and sign a long-term deal. The Chicago Bears were a much improved defense, especially in the second half last year. Jaylen Johnson graded out, at least per Pro Football Focus, as the top cornerback of the 2023 season, and they don't want to let him walk. Yes, Jaylen Johnson did request a trade at the deadline last year, but that was because he wasn't able to come to terms on a long-term deal. I expect the Bears to be able to get a long-term deal done and Jaylen Johnson to be a long-term Bear. It might be a bit of an overpay if he's not able to repeat his production in the 2024 season, but either way, I expect him to be a Bear come the 2024 start. At number 10, we have L'Jarius Sneed, who, this is a weird one because Pro Football Focus, again, has him as a 3-year contract, but the Chiefs have come out and said they are not letting Sneed walk for free. They are willing to franchise tag him and potentially trade him, meaning they're likely not going to franchise tag Chris Jones, but we already expect him to get a long-term contract. That's what I said earlier in this video. So it kind of makes sense to franchise tag Sneed in that case. If they trade him or not, though, that's the big question. That's what I want to know. I do have Sneed staying with the Kansas City Chiefs, but this is a guy that might make a ton of sense for a team like the Detroit Lions, who are really just a good cornerback or two away from being a true juggernaut in the NFL in 2024. He'd be a perfect fit there, but Kansas City, with this increased cap space, is just going to find a way to punt salary and cap hit down the road to be able to keep this band together. Their defense was their calling card. They're not going to let Sneed walk, I don't think. They'll find a way to get this done. At number 11, we have Michael Pittman Jr., the final guy that is projected to get the franchise tag by Pro Football Focus, and probably myself. This is a guy that, again, I expect to stay with the Colts. Nothing exceptional here. And I expect him to get a long-term contract. He's a needed guy to go with an effective rookie in Anthony Richardson, who, yes, played in 2023, but not much. This is a top prospect, the guy you invest a 4th overall pick in, and you do not want to have him go with only Josh Downs as an eligible receiver. You can't let Michael Pittman walk. He's going to be coming back to Indy. I'm pretty confident in that statement. On to number 12, we have Dalvin Hunter, and this is where free agency really starts to open up. This is where a lot of these guys are going to start to move teams. And as I said earlier, with Kirk Cousins, I expect the Vikings to enter into a little bit of a rebuild. And so why would you re-sign a 29-year-old Dalvin Hunter if you're looking to do a rebuild, especially with the season he had in 2023, basically guaranteeing he's going to get a big money contract. So I expect Dalvin Hunter to leave the Vikings. And where do I expect him to go? I expect him to go to the Baltimore Ravens. Stay in that color purple, it's what he's known for. But in all seriousness, the Baltimore Ravens are moving on from Justin Madubuike, at least per my projections. And if they move on from Madubuike, they're going to want to improve their pass rush, especially because they have another pass rusher they might be losing coming later on this list. Dalvin Hunter seems like a bit more of that slight bargain compared to Madubuike. The Ravens are going to want to keep a really good pass rush. This just kind of makes sense to me as a fill-in for that role. Even though they are different positions, they still are playing the same role on the defense. At number 13, we have Mike Evans. Now, if you said at the start of the 2023 season that Mike Evans would re-sign with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this offseason, I probably would have laughed at you. But the Buccaneers ended up making the playoffs, heck, winning a playoff game, and being a much better team than anyone expected. And so now there's a lot of expectations that he could be coming back to Tampa Bay. The other rumor is that he's going to sign with the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, if the Chiefs don't end up keeping both Chris Jones and L'Jarius Sneed, end up losing one, or maybe even both those guys, yes, I think it's actually quite likely that Mike Evans signs there just to have a really good chance at winning a championship and play with Patrick Mahomes. But at the end of the day, I expect the Chiefs to sign those two guys, not really be able to sign Mike Evans, and the Buccaneers have already stated that they have a desire to keep Mike Evans as a Buck for life. I expect him to stick around with the Buccaneers, and heck, he's already won a Super Bowl anyway, so, he doesn't need another one, right? At number 14, we have Kendall Fuller. This is a guy that I think there's no way he stays with the Washington Commanders. This is a team that sold hard at the 2023 deadline, moving on from Chase Young and Montez Sweat, two elite defenders. Why would they get rid of those guys yet re-sign Kendall Fuller? It wouldn't make much sense. So I expect Fuller to hit the free agency market. He's a good cornerback, and there's a few teams I could see him going to, but I'm going a little bit out of left field on this one. I have him signing with the Las Vegas Raiders. Antonio Pierce, the new head coach there, he's a defense-first guy, and they might have some cap room available. Yes, they're still going to have Jimmy Garoppolo under contract. That's a little bit expensive, but they're likely going to be trading away Devontae Adams, who's on a big money deal, and a lot of teams still want him. Look, the New York Jets for that one. And so if they have that cap room and no real studs on the team, this just kind of makes sense to build a defense around Kendall Fuller and Max Crosby and be a really good defensive team in the AFC West. I think this might be a little bit of a long shot, might be a bit spicy given this is a 29-year-old cornerback signing with a team that's really not looking to win now, but I don't know. This just feels like a Raiders Mark Davis type move. So I'm going with it. At number 15, we have Marquise Hollywood Brown. And when I found out Marquise Hollywood Brown would only be 27 years old entering the 2024 season, I think my jaw literally hit the floor. I don't know why. I feel like this guy is so much older than he actually is. But he was on the Cardinals for the last few years, and I don't expect that to continue. I think we're going to see him on a third team moving into the 2024 season. As you see on the contract expectations, the expectations are only a 1-year, $12 million contract. That is not a franchise tag contract or a transition tag contract. That's just expecting Brown to have to sign a 1-year deal to kind of revitalize his career. Yes, he was a first-round pick at one point in time, but the Ravens were willing to move on from him. I don't think he worked that well in the Cardinals, who are likely going to be able to take Marvin Harrison Jr., at least if the draft plays out as it's currently expected. And so why would they want to keep Marquise Hollywood Brown? And the team I have Brown going to is the Tennessee Titans. This is a team that really needs more receivers around Will Levis. I don't think DeAndre Hopkins is enough. They want to know if they have a guy, and why not? Take a little bit of a risk. You have the cap space available. You're moving on from Ryan Tannehill. You're moving on from Derrick Henry. You got the ability to spend money. You're trying to rebuild. You got a new coaching staff. Why not bring in Hollywood Brown and see how he performs with Will Levis? At number 16, we have another wide receiver, and that's Calvin Ridley. A little bit older than Hollywood Brown, but a little bit more established. His 2023 season wasn't as good as a lot of people expected, but was still solid with the Jaguars. And with what he showed in Atlanta prior to his gambling suspension, this guy is still a top quality wide receiver. And so I think someone will be willing to take a chance on him and give him a longer-term deal. That being said, I don't think that someone is the Jaguars. Because at the end of the day, with the Jaguars, he really looked like not the top receiver. The Jaguars almost seem to prioritize guys like Evan Engram and Christian Kirk, as well as their run game with Travis Etienne. So I don't think it makes much sense to pay a guy $50 million over 3 years or whatever his contract might be to be like a third or fourth option in the offense. So I expect the Jaguars to move on from Ridley this offseason, and I expect Ridley to go to the Chicago Bears. This is a team that is always clamoring for more weapons. The argument around Justin Fields is he doesn't have enough weapons. And that would be the same argument if they decided to go with a first-year QB who doesn't have a great year one. And so if you're the Bears, go out, use your cap space, get a guy like Calvin Ridley to go with DJ Moore, a receiving core of those two, and there is nobody who could argue that any quarterback who's there does not have the weapons available to succeed. Whether that be Justin Fields, whether that be Caleb Williams, whether it be anyone else, if you sign Calvin Ridley, you're going to know what you have. On to number 17, we have Chase Young, and this is a guy who has absolutely fallen off. He was picked number 2 overall and considered one of the best prospect pass rushers in years when coming to the league in 2020, but he hasn't fully lived up to that. Now, part of that is injury, but you ended up having the Commanders not exercise his 5th-year option, trade him at the deadline to the 49ers, who nearly benched him in the Super Bowl this year. Now, I will note, I actually really thought Chase Young played a great game in the Super Bowl, but the fact that they were willing to bench him and that a team like the Commanders, who didn't really have much going for him, were willing to not give him a 5th-year option and trade him away for a 3rd-round pick tells you how little that teams in this league are looking at Chase Young as a legitimate option moving forward, which is why you see a 1-year contract as the expectation. This is a guy that absolutely has all the talent in the world to be an elite pass rusher, but you don't know his work ethic, you don't know what he's going to bring to the table, and so he's going to need to be on a prove-it deal. And I don't know where he's going to go. There's a lot of teams that might be willing to give a 1-year low-risk contract to a guy with the potential upside of Chase Young. But the team I have him going to is the Indianapolis Colts. I do not know why. This just seems to make sense to me. This is a team that could want to improve that defense to go with their young and exciting offense, and they have the cap space available to do that. So Chase Young can kind of fit this mold. It's a low risk. It just seems like something Jim Irsay might be willing to do as the owner. So I like this for the Colts. I like it for a lot of teams. I think it's a low-risk, high-reward option, and I could see Chase Young going to almost all of the 32 teams, but the Colts are the ones that I'm picking as they are a borderline playoff team already, and if Anthony Richardson hits and Chase Young hits, they could truly compete in the AFC. At number 18, we have our first running back. It's Saquon Barkley, and we have a lot of running backs moving forward. Saquon Barkley is the top running back free agent, and he was franchise tagged last year, but informed he will not be franchise tagged this year. The expectations is a 3-year, just sub $40 million contract, which isn't great for a guy as well known as Saquon Barkley, and isn't what a guy like him used to get on the market, but at the end of the day, don't say no to $40 million or near $40 million, especially when more than half of that is guaranteed. The question is, though, where is he going to go? He has a desire to stay in New York, but I don't know why the Giants would want to keep Saquon Barkley in tow. They're looking to rebuild most likely. They don't want to pay a running back that much money when they don't really have any other weapons on the field. And so I expect them to let Saquon walk, and I expect Saquon to go to the Chargers. Now, this is one that might not make a lot of sense given the Chargers cap situation, but I expect the Chargers to potentially cut between 2 to 4 of Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams to get out of their absolute cap nightmare they're currently in. And so if they go and do that, or they restructure those guys, all of a sudden they have more cap space. And Jim Harbaugh has always been a guy that's prioritized the run game. Look at Michigan. Blake Corum was the go-to guy in that offense, even with J.J. McCarthy, who could very well be a first-round pick in this year's draft. And then you look at the 49ers, and you had Frank Gore as the primary driver of the offense. This is a guy that just seems like he fits a Jim Harbaugh-style offense, and I could see Harbaugh making a move to go after a guy like Saquon Barkley. And behind a still decent offensive line with Rashawn Slater at left tackle and potentially drafting Joe Alt with their 5th overall pick. At number 19, we have another running back, and that's Josh Jacobs. 1 year younger than Saquon Barkley, but another running back that was on the franchise tag effectively this past year, who has been informed he will not be tagged moving forward. Josh Jacobs is definitely a running back I could see a team like the Chargers looking into, or another running back needy team who's willing to pay a little bit of money for running backs. But at the end of the day, I think Jacobs is going to stick around in Vegas. This just makes sense to me. They're willing to pay him as a running back. They don't have a lot of money tied up in many other positions. So why not keep Josh Jacobs in tow and have a better option for Aiden O'Connell to hand the ball off to instead of putting the ball fully in Aiden O'Connell's hands? Because I don't think the Raiders are going to go out and get a quarterback this year unless they draft one of those mid-tier guys like J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix, and Michael Penix Jr., who I guess could start year one, but either way, that's another video. And at number 20, we have our third of 3 straight running backs. It's Derrick Henry, and this guy is 30 years old, but he is a former 2,000-yard rusher and still rushed for 1,000 yards last year, in spite being much more in a committee compared to previous years and being 29 years of age. The Tennessee Titans, though, seem to be moving off from him. If you watched the last game of the regular season for the Titans, it was pretty emotional with Derrick Henry basically saying goodbye to the fans. I don't think he expects to be back in Tennessee. And so the question is, where does he go? And the team that kind of makes sense to me is the Dallas Cowboys. This is a team that was willing to pay running backs. They had Ezekiel Elliott, who they paid a lot of money to. They ended up giving Tony Pollard a franchise tag after only 1 year in a fully split backfield with Ezekiel Elliott just being his backup really before that. And so if they're willing to pay running backs, and I don't think they're going to pay Tony Pollard given the year he had in 2023, Derrick Henry kind of makes sense to be a bit of a risk-reward take for the Cowboys. And this just seems like a Jerry Jones move. And at the end of the day, if it seems like a Jerry Jones move, I'm going to predict it to happen. At 21, we have Dalton Schultz, a guy that I bet the Houston Texans wish they signed to a longer-term deal last offseason. He had a great year, was an awesome safety net for C.J. Stroud, who had a remarkable rookie year. And so now the question is, what do the Texans do with Dalton Schultz? They have a ton of other receivers like Nico Collins, like Noah Brown, like Tank Dell, like John Mechie. So do they need Dalton Schultz? Probably not. But if I'm the Texans and I have the cap space available and I have a guy that I know my quarterback liked last year in Dalton Schultz, I ain't letting him go. I'm bringing him back to the fold because you know this system worked really well last year. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I have the Texans going back to the well and keeping Dalton Schultz in-house. At number 22, we have Jadeveon Clowney, and I did say earlier in the video that we would have another Ravens pass rusher coming up, and this is him. Jadeveon Clowney was signed really late in last offseason, but ended up being a massive contributing factor to a surprisingly good Baltimore Ravens pass rush. And so this is a guy who's former first overall pick, but he's 31 years old and is only expected to get a 1-year contract given his age and his lack of productivity between his final year in Houston and his most recent year with Baltimore, which might be more scheme related than anything. This is definitely a candidate to return to the Baltimore Ravens, but I have him going a different direction. I actually have him signing with the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions have a ton of cap space this offseason, and they're the only team that I really haven't had getting a player earlier on in this video. The reason being because they have a lot of guys internally they have to pay. Amon-Ra St. Brown's on the last year of his deal. Penei Sewell's on the last year of his rookie scale deal before his team option year on his rookie contract. And so because of that, they don't want to sign guys to long-term deals. But the Lions could absolutely use a solid pass rusher to go opposite of Aiden Hutchinson, and Jadeveon Clowney could fit the bill, be a low-risk signing that doesn't end up hurting your ability to re-sign your own internal guys. So it just kind of makes sense for the Lions. At 23, we're going back to running backs with Tony Pollard. This is a guy that absolutely fumbled the bag this past season. Tony Pollard was considered an incredibly good and effective running back after the 2022 season, but the Cowboys franchise tagged him. He did not perform as the featured back with Dallas. I expect Dallas to let him go this offseason. As you already know, I have them signing Derrick Henry. And so who do I think will go out and pay Tony Pollard? Well, this one's a little bit spicy. I have Pollard going to the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a team that really didn't have a true running back go-to guy at the start of last season. It ended up becoming DeAndre Swift early on in the season. I think week 2 is when he kind of took over as the top running back. But DeAndre Swift is also a free agent. And I expect the Eagles to go with a guy that they've seen, that they've gone against historically, and that they know is a quality running back who will be exceptional behind an awesome offensive line like what the Eagles have. I think the Cowboys have a good offensive line too, but it's not to the quality of the Eagles. I think Tony Pollard will thrive here, and I just like the Eagles and Cowboys drama going on. It's just fun. At number 24, we have another bag fumble running back, Austin Ekeler. This guy was considered one of the best running backs in the league coming into the 2023 season. In my main fantasy redraft league, I took him 4th overall. I regret everything. But either way, Austin Ekeler is still a good enough running back that somebody's going to give him a chance. But at the end of the day, it's probably going to be in a split backfield and not with the Chargers. I don't think the Chargers are going to stick with him. As you already know, I have the Chargers going with Saquon Barkley. I just think that makes sense for Jim Harbaugh. And so where does Austin Ekeler end up? Well, a team that I could see looking for a running back, willing to pay a low-risk contract, and also has the pieces to have a good committee with Austin Ekeler is the Houston Texans. Again, I have the Texans signing a number of guys on this list, but they have the cap space to do so. And none of these guys are really massive cap hits outside of Brian Burns. So Austin Ekeler to the Texans makes sense. They had Dameon Pierce, who did not live up to the hype this past season, and Devin Singletary was probably the better running back, but also, again, not a top-tier running back by any means. And so why not give a chance to Austin Ekeler to play with an absolutely explosive young offense? If it works, awesome. You have an even better offense than you had last year around a sophomore CJ Stroud. If it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world for the team that has the cap space available to make this work. So just kind of makes sense. But really, Ekeler could wind up anywhere. It just depends who wants to give him a timeshare in the backfield. And at number 25, we have our final player on this list. It's Baker Mayfield. And Baker Mayfield, if you told me he would be on a list like this at the beginning of this past year, I would have laughed in your face. I did a QB ranking video all the way at the start of the season, and I had Baker Mayfield, I think, as the 31st of 32 quarterbacks ranked. I'm sorry, Baker. I disrespected you. I ain't doing that again. You are in our top 25 free agents this time. I got you. Baker Mayfield is going to get paid. 3-year, $90 million contract is what's expected, and I think he's going to earn every penny of that deal, and he might even be able to get more. Look, Geno Smith in his 3-year, $100 million contract. That's what could be in store for Baker Mayfield. And I think a lot of teams are going to go out there and really try to gun for Baker Mayfield. But if I'm Baker, I'm going where there's a lot of weapons, and I'm going where I already know the offense. I'm staying in Tampa Bay. This just makes sense. They're willing to re-sign him. Baker Mayfield should absolutely want to go there. This is a guy who was already passed on by 3 teams previously. The Browns didn't want him anymore. The Rams didn't want him anymore. The Panthers didn't want him anymore. Why would he risk going to a new team that might just immediately say, we don't want you anymore, when you are on a team that says, you know what, we do want you, Baker. I expect him to stay in Tampa because of that. But that's it for our top 25. Let me know what you think of this list and the destinations I have the players go to, and let me know who you're most excited about to see where they go in free agency. We'll see you all next time. Peace!